Niall, you
Yes.
were in court this morning.
I was.
You were performing a number of tasks, including trying to identify the tracksuit that Glen Ward, aka Mr. Flashy, wore for his sentence hearing.
I mean, I know the logos for Adidas, Nike, Gola maybe, and Puma.
I don't know what the hell is Gola.
That was from the 1970s or 80s.
I'm going to have to Google.
I know Neil's, but after that, I get a bit, I'm not.
The logo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I've never seen that in my life.
No.
Is it kind of retro now?
It'll be definitely retro.
Yeah.
But so Glen Ward was there. Obviously, he was wearing a grey tracksuit. I think NASA has a picture of what I drew the logo to be.
Yeah.
And we've been looking up ever since, but it eludes us.
So you've basically come down to Monterex, which is sort of mid-range. I'm not sure about the expense. Anyway, that's all being a little bit silly about it because it is a much more serious topic than that. Glen Ward is a significant character, significant enough for the Gardaí to release a very lengthy, detailed press statement in the aftermath of his conviction or his sentencing, rather.
Yeah, I mean, we've often spoken about before how some other police in other jurisdictions really help frame the conviction once it's done and give it a good context. And the guards certainly have done that today. They put out a video of the guns that Mr. Flashy, as we know him, but Glen Ward was convicted of possession of. And they also put out a lengthy statement, I think recognising the fact that Glen Ward had even on a personal level, because due to the level of criminality he was involved in, he had a deep impact on Finglas as an area. He was a participant in a wide range of drug dealing activities, obviously gun crime, and a range of feuds, some small and some, very, very serious. And he had a deep impact. So, I mean, I'll read out some of the obviously it refers to Eric O'Driscoll as well, who was Glen Ward's younger brother, who was convicted a number of weeks ago, basically for the same weapons possession. So, Detective Superintendent Paul Murphy acknowledges the convictions of the two men. He says the commitment of the detectives in Finglas Garda Station to investigate these individuals with a history of involvement in organised crime in our capital city and locally in their own community has ensured the conviction both by the Special Criminal Court. Criminals like Eric O'Driscoll and Glen Ward act and believe like they are above the law, inflicting significant harm and tragedy on families in the community in which they live, but also operate their criminality from. My message to young people in our communities is that there is nothing positive that these criminals can offer you and that their actions are motivated by greed and only self-serving. You are disposable to them. These convictions and sentences are a clear message to any person who involves themselves in any way in organised crime or criminal activity that An Garda Síochána will investigate these matters and they will be brought to justice before the courts.
So Glen Ward is standing in an as yet unidentified tracksuit. We'll come back to that. But who's in court? What's the kind of media attention like? What time does this happen today?
So it happens at 10 o'clock in the morning. Glen Ward is obviously one of the most notorious names in gangland at the moment, over the last number of years, over the last decade. But I suppose when you see him being brought into court in that way and sentenced, really there's very little fuss. He is already, I suppose, to a degree, his influence on criminality, organised crime, is probably at an end, effectively, due to these convictions. There was four people, I think, supporting him.
Where were they sitting?
They were sitting in the Special Criminal Court in one of the seats. There was a small number of media present, a significant number of Gardaí. But really, we've seen other people come to court with these big crew of supporters, people coming in to have a look at them. But there was 3 women and actually a man as well, was all that turned up today.
Were they young, same kind of age as him? What age is he? He's not...
He's 30.
32, is he?
33, I think. So there was a couple of younger women and one probably of a similar age to him and another man in his 30s as well. Now,
what's your impression of him? I have seen him before, but I don't know, do you have outside photographs?
I haven't seen him. I mean, he's very, very small, I suppose.
Yeah, he's very small.
Would be the thing that stands out about him. He certainly looks much more bulked up now than he did in the pictures before he went to prison. He's bulky but small. There was evidence given in the sentencing hearing about how he's been going to the gym diligently behind bars, and you can probably see that. But he doesn't have that kind of presence, I suppose. Have seen other criminals in the dock or in real life, and they have this kind of presence, I suppose, and he doesn't have that. And
did he have a confidence, a cockiness about him? I mean, the guard here, Detective Superintendent Paul Murphy, is really, I mean, he's naming the two, and it is unlike the Gardaí to release, press statements like this, but he's basically, saying these are two gangland criminals. I mean, these guys are convicted of weapons offences, but they haven't actually, there's nothing there for them, or as of yet, about directing or running criminal enterprises or organised crime groups, but they're clearly stating they have a long history of involvement in organised crime.
Yeah, and we heard Glen Ward's convictions are read out as he was sentenced. There's 20 convictions, including an assault, but mostly for road traffic offences. So you're not seeing this, huge amount of convictions. But what the guard statement is recognising the particularly negative impact they had on Finglas, but the broader city as well, because Glen Ward rose, I suppose, to the top of organised crime on the back of the Kinnan cartel sort of sponsoring him, on the back of his association with Trevor Byrne, who really operated a cell for the Kinnans at their peak in the Finglas area. When Trevor Byrne fled the country after the murder of Eddie Hutch, Glen Ward became this outsized figure. Now, we have many people selling drugs in the city who don't go on to become as notorious as Glen Ward. And the reason Glen Ward became so notorious is because of his involvement in various feuding and violent acts, because of his support for other people who were involved in murderous feuds in the city. As soon as he was convicted, I put it up on social media, and straight away I got a message from somebody saying, great news, but saying Finglas has gone so much quieter since he has been put away, and he's been on remand and for whatever number.
So how long has he been on remand? Because let's have a look at this sentence that he's got, because I suppose the sentence isn't really the major success here. It's putting him off the street and getting him a conviction as serious as a gun charge.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in custody since January 2024, so that's
right. So a year and a bit. And what did he get? 5?
We got 5 years and 3 months and another, I think, 9 months suspended.
So 5 years, 3 months, let's say.
Yeah. So they went.
Served a year and a half?
He served a year, well, about a year and a half. So
he might be in for another 2.5 years?
Something like that.
That would be about it?
Yeah, that would be about it. And then he'd be on a suspended sentence for 9 months.
Yeah.
And he's agreed as the terms of a sentence that he won't associate it with 6 people who weren't named in court. But presumably they're because of their involvement in criminality. So we heard a lot of details in obviously over the years, as this case has gone on. But the basic story is that Glen Ward and Eric O'Driscoll were in a taxi. It is believed that there was a shooting attempt on that taxi on the Talca Valley Road, sort of at the border between Finglas and Glasnevin. Mm-hmm. And they fled the taxi, basically. And a phone was left in the back of the taxi, which the guards, when they were called to the scene, confiscated. And when they managed to get into the phone, they found these videos of the 2 guys handling guns, basically. Mm-hmm. And once they had the videos, they were able to connect that to the seizure of weapons, which had happened, I think it was 4 months earlier, at a home in Finglas in 2022.
We do have videos of those weapons, and they look really I don't know much about guns. But these things look like, a modern fridge that you just have to press a button and you get it sorted. Like, is that not what it looks like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the guns
They're almost computerized nearly now, are they?
Well, I mean, these were proper weapons. I mean, people will see over the years where you put the guards to seize a gun and you look at it and it's literally from something, it could be from World War II or just after. But these are very modern machine guns, submachine guns.
With different settings on them.
With different settings,
Presumably for the amount of bullets that are released at the same time or whatever.
Yeah, like literally lethal weapons. And I mean, that was...
And much easier to point and target and shoot than the kind of probably don't need, as like everything that has developed with technology, you probably don't need quite as much training. They're probably lighter and all the rest of it and don't have such a kickback. And
yeah, I mean, it was described in court that they were in good working condition. Obviously, the videos, we see this one video put out by the guards where you can see the guns being handled. You don't see faces, but there were other videos, first of Glen Ward.
They've only put out the video of the seizure by the Gardaí. They haven't put out these other videos that were on the phone of the two of them.
But they were
the weapons.
Yeah, but they were described in court.
Yeah.
And on one occasion, one of the videos shows Glen Ward firing a pistol into the air, and then he hands it to Eric O'Driscoll, who also fires the weapon. There's a group of young lads around watching, and that was also taken into account during sentencing. That the judge said that they were sort of encouraging criminality.
And what were they doing with those weapons? The videos, like, were they putting them out? Were they sending them on these WhatsApp groups? Their faces are clearly visible in it, so it has to be more so for their private collection.
It's a private collection. I mean, but I suppose it feeds into what the guards are saying there. And, while he's being sentenced, the judge is saying that even the firing of these weapons, while they're lethal weapons and could be used in gangland, but it also has to be taken into account that they're effectively corrupting young people. And that, that by, they're glamorising crime, I suppose. Or they're certainly showing it off. Now, what happened today was he was ultimately sentenced on one count, which is possession of the firearms, basically. A second count was taken into consideration, which was the reckless discharge of the firearm and the possession of the submachine gun. So when a charge is taken into consideration, it's effectively the facts of it are accepted. But, they don't proceed with sentencing on that charge. Basically, they described how the judges had this one charge that they were sentencing them on. And the explanation, I suppose, is that it's possession. But that they said there was, the guards had to rely, because there wasn't any forensic evidence, basically, is what they said, and he wasn't caught in possession of the weapon. There was a video, but the guards were solely relying on that video, is how they described it. That was basically the maximum sentence they could give. So they said they started off with 8.5-year sentence, and they worked back, taking into mitigation a number of factors.
The guilty pleas.
The early guilty plea, or the guilty plea, which they said was not particularly early, but still it was of assistance to the state. They said also the fact that he's on 23-hour lockup in prison has to be taken into account, and the fact he has a 9-year-old child also was a factor, and the fact that the governor gave a report from the prison to say his behaviour has improved, that he's participating in courses, and just the normal stuff, I suppose. So,
stop you for a second there on the court reporting, but the 23-hour lockup we have discussed before, that's because he's basically, he is under threat within the prison system.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for the 23-hour lockup is that two factors. One, the Kinnan gang, I suppose, have disassociated themselves from him effectively.
Including Trevor Byrne.
Well, I mean, I don't know about him in particular, but certainly the Kinahans were said to have let it known that Flashy wasn't part of who they were within the prison system. So we've spoken about before, there'd be people who, I suppose, let the prison guards know who they will accept on their wing, who there might be trouble with, but they haven't sort of backed Flashy. And then also he's played a role in so many different feuds and sub-feuds. Certainly his gang played a role in a very violent feud that ultimately would lead to the death of James Whelan. But he had roles in various other complications, let's put it that way, involving members of the Gucci gang. Also, and people like the Tristan Sherry, who was involved in the Brown Steakhouse murder, was an associate of Glen Ward. So some of these were...
when you say members of the Gucci gang, that would have been his own grouping, essentially, that had sort of, they had gone into different factions and fallen out. I mean, the overall Gucci gang are seen as Flashy's outfit.
But they certainly were categorised as that, but it got a lot more complicated as time went on.
After the James Whelan murder.
Yeah, so I mean there was splits, and then there was splits within the splits.
Because James Whelan, of course, kind of tried to go his own way.
He tried to go his own way.
And they came to blows, as is classic within the gangs when they do, fall out like that. So clearly there are still a sort of a James Whelan faction plus a Flashy faction.
Yeah.
But I presume they have split again.
Yeah, I mean, look, either way, I suppose what it does show is that Glen Ward doesn't have the protection within the prison to be able to go into the general population.
Is he in the Joy?
Yeah, no, he's in Portlaoise Prison, which is obviously the high security prison in Ireland. There is a Kinahan wing there in Portlaoise. Obviously, Patrick Keating will be there, but there was also people like Nicky McConnell. All of these would have an association with the Kinahan cartel. Liam Brannigan would have been in there until he was released.
I think Patrick Keating is undoubtedly, though, in charge of that wing.
Yeah.
And seen as the elder. And he seems to be a guy who wouldn't appreciate the likes of that sort of attitude of Glen Ward.
No, I think exactly.
Everything has been conducted in public. He's courted publicity, Ward, yes. And not his type of person. So, you wonder really, is that Kinahan or is it Patrick Keating's terms now? Because you do wonder, has he fallen out with all of those Kinahan cronies that he used to bring out with?
mean,
I'm sure there's still individual friendships going on. I mean, Trevor Byrne was his mentor for a long time, and I can't see him having an issue with Ward's publicity or his, the chaos around him.
No, but I think what it really came down to was the Kinahans did at some point, or the Kinahan gang broader rather than Daniel from Dubai, let it be known that Flashy wasn't operating under their umbrella and that they weren't going to back him or give him that full support because he caused absolute and utter chaos. Look, it's a good day for the guards, It shows you, I suppose, how relentlessly they can pursue these guys. I mean, this probably was a hard case to build. Even in the sentencing, Judge Greeley said that there was a certain unreality to his suggestion that Ward only had a fleeting involvement with the firearm. And I think what she was basically saying was that they, because they couldn't trace that he left the firearm where it was found, or that he had it in the aftermath, or he had control of it. That couldn't be proven effectively. But she said that she accepted that there was a dearth of evidence of his relationship to the firearm, and his plea was accepted on the basis of what can be seen in the video clip. So I think it's another one of these cases where the guards could have said, well, you're sending this to the DPP. It's only on the basis of a video clip. You can't, you're not catching anybody red-handed. He could argue, I suppose, you can't even prove that's a real gun. But the guards pursued it and brought these cases, and it has been successful. Ultimately, he attempted to resist it, but pled guilty in the end.
Now, the 2 points really of this statement that was issued were, one, the kind of the effects on the community of Finglas that organised crime has, and these two brothers in particular, with their history of involvement in organised crime, the effects they had basically within their own neighbourhood, and we can maybe talk a little bit about that. But the second part of this statement is actually quite a direct punch between the eyes of middle-class cocaine users. Because Detective Superintendent Paul Murphy says, finally, my message to any person who uses a legal drug in a drugs in a recreational environment, predominantly cocaine, is that although you might consider yourself removed from organised crime and live in comfortable communities, every time you buy or consume illegal drugs, you're directly supporting criminals such as Glen Ward and Eric O'Driscoll and the misery that they have inflicted on their communities, which is something we repeatedly talk about, isn't it? Because a lot of cocaine users are middle-class working people who don't have an addiction. They just like to, finish the night off with some cocaine. There's a disconnect between the buyer and the trail back to the community, first of all, where I suppose the drugs are those sort of drugs and the money and all of that goes round with it is having an effect. And then back, if you wanted to go further and disconnect further from the user, you go all the way back to Colombia, to the jungles and the impoverished farmers and all the political problems that go on there. But it's interesting to see that the Gardaí making that in a statement that is actually directly concerning two individuals, as opposed to a general sweeping statement about that.
It is very direct, and I think it shows you the significance of these convictions and these guys being put behind bars. Like the middle class users it's an interesting line. So Glen Ward, one of the chief contacts he had within the Kinahans was a guy called Ian O'Hare, who was related to Ross Browning, but basically one of Ross Browning's right-hand man. And we have pictures of Glen Ward and Ian O'Hare together. I think they went on holidays. Another one of Ian O'Hare's close associates was a guy called Fran Fennell, who we've spoken about many times. Now, Fran Fennell was, he made a huge amount of money selling cocaine to the middle classes directly, particularly around the Grafton Street area and pubs and clubs, supplying people in the socialite world, the modelling world. So that connection is actually not hard to prove in this case. They are both
not that many steps away.
It's not even. It's basically one step away. Ultimately back to Ross Browning. So it's not a stretch what the guards are saying. Now we know flashy Glen Ward, one of the reasons he became so notorious was because of his involvement in what's now known as drug-related intimidation. So people are supplying cocaine, they get in debt or a shipment is lost or something goes wrong. Now that cocaine is ultimately going to middle class people who have no involvement, who if they lose a bit of money or they get ripped off, they're not going to break some legs. But Glen Ward and his associates were particularly notorious for threatening, burning people out, threatening families, all of that to collect cocaine debts. So again, it isn't a far reach what the guards are saying. Now, there's always a disconnect, I think, when people say that. I do understand that if you say to somebody, you're funding organised crime, you're funding somebody getting kneecapped by taking that line or by snorting a line of cocaine, it doesn't sort of hit home. But in this case, you really can't trace it.
Hit home because usually they're walking out of their homes in a community that people aren't getting kneecapped in.
Exactly.
Because they're living in middle class areas and their kids are going to private schools and they're able to let them out in the daytime and at night time without a fear that they're going to be lured into a drug gang, because the fact of the matter is the drug gangs aren't existing, in that feral way that they do in the likes of Finglas. And I mean, people living in Finglas during all these times of intimidation, and no doubt it's still going on there, albeit Glen Ward is locked up for a wee while, they are terrified to let their kids out and what they might find. And it's frightening. And people who are using the cocaine, are a certain big population of people who are using cocaine, are disconnected because they simply don't live in the communities affected.
No, and see, what happens with the cocaine trade is, like, underpinning it is the violence. It can't operate without the violence. Money, a lot of it is done on credit, on tick. People get drugs on tick and pay back later. Like a huge portion of that business is done that way. If something goes wrong, you can't go to the small claims court, you can't go to the guards, you can't hire a solicitor. It has to be done with violence. So it's an inevitable part of the trade. The more money that's to be made, the violence is higher. And on some level, that is what makes it the business work, is either the threat or the actuality of violence. And Glen Ward, if you look at all of the gangland violence really that happened in North Dublin over a 5 or 6 year period, one way or another.
He's not far away.
He's not far away, and he's certainly not far away from the people involved. The sharing and use of weapons was so common across all of that business. And the number of double crosses, I mean, we talk about the Coolock feud. I mean, all of those people, there was degrees of double crossing going on all the time. And it was a murky business, and he was one of the people who seemed comfortable in that murky business.
What do you think his ambition is?
Well, his ambition now... he's going to be a young man when he gets out. He'll be in his approaching his late 30s. He will be very notorious. I don't know. It's an
ego, and he likes the publicity. He certainly doesn't shy away from it. I mean, when he was kind of being nicknamed by the media, because of course he didn't have a kind of a serious conviction that we could rely upon when naming him in relation to this kind of activity, he was putting the pictures out of himself on social media, open to anybody.
Yes.
This was not kind of, private stuff. This was put out. And I mean, I particularly recall around the time of, was it Zach Parker's funeral? And he had photographed himself
Caelan Smith, wasn't it?
In the back of a limo.
Yeah.
And put up photographs of all these sort of floral tributes that clearly they had paid for. At Zach Parker's funeral. Some of them had showed up in the uniform of the Kinahan cartel, Sean Little, who would die sometime later by gun violence as well. But some of them had worn them. Flashy hadn't. He had worn his own gear, and he was photographed with his friends. He was at the funeral, but not in attendance with the Grang, or he was certainly offering sympathy or something.
Yeah.
He was doing something at that time, which is 2019, so I'm sorry if my memory's a little bit fails me about the exact detail, but I do know at that time at the funeral that he was actually agitating for some publicity around it. He was doing something slightly controversial that was going to feed into the media narrative around this funeral. So he's somebody with a huge ego. And I think this is probably why Peadar Keating won't like him or welcome him into ever. He'll probably remain in the 23-hour lockup there. He's not going to offer him any protection, but he's looking to be a name, to be something. And has he actually an ambition to... What do we know about his criminal activity, about his earnings, about his laundering ability, about what he has squirreled away? Does he own anything? Is he a serious player, or is he just, what's worse and far more dangerous, is he just a violent, volatile show-off looking for publicity?
I think it's probably the latter. I think that what happened was that he got lucky with the fact that the series of older criminals in the Finglas area, for one reason or another, were kind of taken out of the picture. A large part of them due to the policing of the Hutch-Kinahan feud. He had certainly a well-run street dealing operation in the Finglas and Blanchardstown and Ballymun area. He had access to a lot of firearms because of those Kinahan connections, and that all shot him right up the top. Probably in another world, at another time in gangland, he wouldn't have gotten that far that quickly. I think once he got there, he relied on the threats, fear and intimidation. And we've seen this...
and his name and reputation.
And the fact that he, I suppose, as the guards refer to there, he managed to sort of get a lot of young lads to do a lot of the work for him. Now, those types of guys in gangland don't tend to last long. I suppose there's something the equivalent of the Dundon operation, or there's another operation in North Dublin that's going through the courts as well, where they inspire this huge amount of fear, they back it up with violence, and that can really intimidate and threaten and sow fear in the local community. But they don't really have the capacity to sustain it in the long run. So they either end up shot or in prison. If you look at some of the other people you're talking about, somebody like Peadar Keating, who managed to, be part of a genuine international trafficking operation. And had his hand in legitimate businesses, stayed under the radar, and was undone by events. And it's great that he did get undone. But flashy is a different matter. So do you really, those guys who rely on that type of threats and fear, they don't tend to last long. I mean, they don't have that long trajectory. Flashy as well. Remember, there was a huge amount of, if you look at the social media surrounding that flashy feud, as you might call it, I mean, it was particularly horrific. People's families, innocent parents, innocent women, all of that going up there. Intimidation of people who had nothing to do with anything except for being related to people. I mean, really, really, sort of the lowest level, the fact that if you're related to somebody that you can't live in peace in an area and you're doing nothing, was really, really sinister and
Did you know
wrong.
he had a 9-year-old child?
I hadn't actually heard that, but I did. So that was taken into account as well. Look, what is left for him there? I think he's a busted flush, but you never know.
Okay, Niall, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicola.